This show is sponsored by Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den 10, you're giving back on a global scale. Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interview titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. My guest today is a psychotherapist specializing in trauma therapy and personal development. She believes there is so much possibility and potential within us, and that's why she started coaching, programs, and a community of fearless leaders. Her mission is to create an environment that focuses on and honors your unique strengths and abilities by highlighting, accentuating, and growing these to help you move beyond mere survival and instead give you the skills needed to help you thrive. Overcoming Fear to Thrive, founder and CEO of Trinity Community Mental Health Center. Please welcome Sarai Nammur.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you on too. And I just want to make sure, I always like to do a little check-in on the name. Did I get it right, Sarai?
Yes, you got it 100% right.
I love that. We had a nice little conversation before we got started on the podcast, before we started recording the podcast about where you're from and where you grew up, first of all. Not grew up, but was born, but where you're from a nationality standpoint in terms of your name. I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit about that with our audience.
Well, my mother is Cuban. She's from Cuba, and my dad is from Ecuador. And I was born in Brooklyn. And I was just telling you that although I was born in Brooklyn, I've never really been to New York because I grew up here. I've been in Miami, which is really Hialeah, a section of Dade County. We consider, us Miamians consider all the bottom of Florida as Miami. So when we say Miami, we mislead people because Miami isn't everything, but we think that. But I'm really from Hialeah, Florida, which is a part of Dade County, which is hence my accent that you said it was good.
I thought you were from Brooklyn.
Yeah, right.
No, but and what we were talking about too, which I think relates to some of the work that you do too, is how like all this mix of cultures and different people, like in your family and your children, and I mean, we were talking about mine and my background, and just how it's just, you put somebody somewhere and boom, immediately like they take on that nationality.
Yes, definitely.
I'm relating that to mental health a little bit, and we're going to get into that deeper in the sense of like that we can adapt to our environments and we can create an environment around us, whether it's an environment that doesn't support us, which obviously we want to get out of, or an environment that supports us. And that's what you do with your groups and all of your programs.
Yes, definitely. And people, I think I've also lived in Kansas and in California. That's where I went to school. And I believe that people like us that live in like a metropolitan type of area, like New York, or like me, I'm here in Miami, we're more able to adapt because we see so many different cultures and we're so used to that, as opposed to someone who lives in an area where it's the same type of person. So I think for us, it's easier. Plus, I'm multicultural, even though I am Hispanic. My mother and my father are very different because Ecuadorian culture is very different from Cuban culture. So even within the Hispanic community, I also experienced that. And we see that a lot here in Miami. There's so many cultures.
It's interesting that you bring that up about cultures and diversity. Actually, I was just doing a public speaking workshop. We were just talking about that. I was doing a public speaking workshop, and I forget the name of my co-presenter. If it comes to mind, I know that her company's name is Mo's Playhouse, but something that she brought up in terms of her public speaking tip for our audience at the time was to learn about other cultures, if you want to be a better communicator and a better speaker. And to your point, like if you're in a place where there aren't that many cultures around you, well, go out and explore, go out and learn, go travel, travel through the internet if that's what you need to do. But however it is, learn about other cultures, because that's just going to help you understand things a little bit better from other standpoints and other point of view.
Definitely. Like, as much as I thought I disliked living in Kansas for 2 years, it was so hard for me. I really appreciate the learning I got out of living in a small university town where it was, I had lived in downtown and I didn't know I lived in downtown till like a year in, because it was so small. But you're completely right. And I do agree also that not the internet, but social media exposes us to that, to different cultures and different ways of thinking. I definitely don't have that idea in my mind of a lot of people ask me is do I think social media is bad? Absolutely not. It has opened so many doors, and I'm not even against. Yes, with children, you have to like have certain limits, but mostly just be the person that sits next to them and is able to explain stuff to them, because I think it's more good than bad. I don't know how you feel about that, but I really don't have the opinion that it's a negative thing or a bad thing. It's more about the meaning that we give to it and our experience with it.
I love that, the meaning that we give to it. I agree with you. It's, everything that's out there, whether it's television or internet or so many things that I think sometimes get a bad rap, it's because of like, what is the person watching? What is the person taking in? Like, I've learned so much through social media. I mean, me doing this podcast right now, me doing the video on this podcast right now was all learned through social media, was learned through going to YouTube and watching videos. Actually, I was just at the 10X Stages conference and I got to sit in a room as a judge for the Speak Off, for the Great American Speak Off, with somebody that I learned all of this from, Sean Cannell from Think Media. Was one of the judges, right? He was one of the judges. Cool. And I was like, I DM'd him right away. I was like, I used to watch all of your videos and that's how I learned all of this. But that was through social media. So it's like, what are you consuming? It's interesting that you bring social media up, because you were just telling me about the live show that you did for almost a year and your vision for it. And I would love for you to share that with our audience.
Yeah, that really started out of, I wasn't expecting to do that, even though I had it's almost like the law of attraction. I had a feeling I wanted to do it, but I never thought it was going to happen like that. And it just happened from one week to the other. I was going to be a speaker at Billy Osbrook's it was actually my event. It was my event. I also do events. They're called Unleash Your Greatness. So I was going to have the speakers. We were thinking of, how do I present the speakers? And all of a sudden someone said, you need to interview each one of us. So I started interviewing each one of them, and Unleash Your Greatness has everything to do with, where does greatness come from? And I personally believe that there's adversity, trauma goes hand in hand with greatness. It's almost like we cannot even birth our greatness without that friction, without that adversity. So that's why I created Unleash Your Greatness. So I know I'm telling you the backstory. So this is the backstory. That's what we want. And then I started interviewing the speakers that were going to be at my event. And it went so amazing that I was like, I need to interview more people. There's so many people. There's more people that have experienced childhood trauma, complex PTSD. I'm a survivor of complex PTSD. So there's more people that have experienced complex PTSD and are healers and people that give back and people with missions than the people who have experienced these things and end up killing their family. But what we see on the news are the people who experience childhood trauma and then they go on a rampage and do horrible things. But the reality isn't that. The reality is that the majority of the people that are doing great things in a small scale or at a larger scale, whether you're that nurse who is helping someone with chemo, or you're someone like me doing therapy, or even a mother who's just trying to be the best mother possible, that usually that desire usually is birthed from a place of pain. So I wanted to give that information to the population, let's call it, the population of whoever is watching me. So I started doing that, and I really interviewed so many amazing people. I did that like a year and a half. So I probably have like 50 interviews. And then I bumped into my own personal stuff that happened to me in January 2021, where I stopped doing it, but I'm going to pick it up again now, because I think people do need to hear more good stories. Like, I call it the good news. So what I was sharing with you is that I was thinking of myself as a news reporter of the good news, because when do we see good news on the news? When? Never.
It's so true. That I have a friend, Tom Langan, who does a podcast called Something Good for Goodness Sake. And it's just to share good.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I think and you know this from the mental health space, not mental health, but just psychology space, to say, in that it's the negative attracts more viewers. And so unfortunately, that's why we have that news cycle, is that's the drama and everything in it. Whereas there's not much drama in doing good, I guess. It's just really all just happy people, which if we could spread that, wherever we can, I love that.
I agree. And it creates a warped reality, because the more we keep seeing this over and over, we start believing it. This is why we have recessions and all these other things that happen, is because they set in the fear, and then we believe that that's the reality. And that, I don't believe that's the reality. First of all, if I would have thought that was reality, I wouldn't even be alive. I wouldn't be where I'm at. I wouldn't have overcome everything I've overcome. So I have never ever believed that that's the reality. And I, honestly, that is the thing that has kept me alive, that has kept me going, that has kept me reaching for my vision, because I never set my eyes on the darkness, which I put it back there. I just put it back there because that's where the darkness is. I'm always looking forward, and I set my eyes on the vision. And so since I know that's what saved me and that's what I use to save others, then that's why I'm so focused on, I call it Thrive Talk. My program is called Thrive Life. It's all about thriving. But, nothing in the world really thrives without going through the pain of growing and adversity and all of the hard things. I can't think of anything that thrives without it. You need the friction.
Yeah. Just and we talked about social media and the news and everything. And so part of why we're talking about this live that you did is because I do an Instagram live every morning. And I literally just spoke about this morning, about like, what are you consuming and what are you feeding your mind? And it's like, it goes back to your groups and your circles and the people around you, in that when you surround yourself with positive thinking people, with optimistic thinking people like yourself, and that's a community that you've created, and people who support you, right? Because, well, first, let me just stay on this point of like, when you surround yourself with all of this, now it's like you can let go of all the pain and everything else that happened in the past, and you can move forward with it. So the next point that I just want to make that you just stated there, and I want to go into your story a little bit more, is acknowledging things. So I think I want to make sure that everybody understands that you're not living in a different world than everybody else, and neither am I. We acknowledge what's going on. We acknowledge the reality of situations and things. It's that we choose to not stay in that place. We choose to acknowledge it, say, okay, that's what's going on. These are the facts. Great. This is the fact of my past and my childhood and all that other stuff. And then what reality, what story do I want to paint today? What do I want to choose to go?
Yes.
You brought up a couple really great points, and I want to just kind of also dissect a few things, because you brought up some things that I've never heard of, and I would love for you to just help us understand. So one of the things that you brought up was complex PTSD, and I'd hope that you could maybe unpack that for us a little bit as to what that is.
I will. Okay, so could I go back to something you just said, and then I'm going to go to.
I love this, PTSD. By the way, because I'm watching you. You're doing the same thing as me. I take notes when I'm interviewing, and I'm seeing you. You're the very first podcast guest I've ever had taking notes too. So I love it. So yes, so this is awesome. This is like, everybody. This is a workshop. You're getting a workshop today. Let's go.
I just want to go back to something you said about acknowledging. You're right. I'm not living in Cinderella land where nothing bad, I'm not living in that where, I get saved. No, I saved myself. So for me, it is about acknowledging. It is about acknowledging, but it's also about taking back my power. So how do we take back our power is by what you just said. You acknowledge, but then I give it the meaning that is going to move me forward. So I could use the meaning of, like all these bad things are happening to me and become the victim of my life, or I could become the creator of my life. So how do I become the creator of my life is by giving empowered meaning to the things that happen. So things are always going to happen. People feel that they're victimized by life because bad things happen. And the truth is that bad things are going to happen because there are always things happening. You're happening, I'm happening, the guy across the street is happening. So right now I could walk out of here, drive up the street, and because someone else is also happening, they're also living their life, and maybe they're on their phone and they're not looking at the light, then their happening crashes into me, that I'm also happening. And that's not because God doesn't love me, or it isn't because I have bad luck. It's because things are going to happen in our life. They're meant to happen. Then I choose to decide what meaning do I give to that. So I could walk out of there going, I have such bad luck. Bad things always happen to me. Or I could say, this is one of the things that were meant to happen in my life, because bad things will happen in my life, and I'm going to lose things in my life. I'm going to lose people, all of that. And what am I going to do now? So that is, I like that you mentioned that, because that's how we take our power back. And that is so important. We get to choose that. We have so much choice in life. So I wanted to say that. You want me to go back to CPTSD?
Yeah, I'm interested in that. And what is that?
Okay, so CPTSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And that is different from what we normally hear as PTSD. So PTSD is mostly happens when you have an occurrence. Like, for example, driving up the street, you get crashed into, you get trapped in your car, but you survive. But now you have PTSD, and for 6 months, you can't drive a car. You're thinking about it. You're having nightmares. You're having flashbacks, all of that. Sorry, excuse me. That's different from complex PTSD. Complex PTSD, the type that I'm saying that I'm a survivor of, is trauma that happens from the people that are meant to take care of you, that could happen. It could also happen, for example, in the military, but the one that I'm referring to has to do with childhood complex PTSD. So that has to do with having a childhood where there's multiple occurrences of trauma. And those occurrences happen because of or due to neglect by the people who are meant to take care of us. And the people who are meant to take care of us are going to be, first and foremost, our parents, our grandparents, caretakers, that sort of thing. But it could also happen, for example, like say you have a childhood where one of your parents was sick of cancer and died. Then you had to move to someone else's house and you were molested there. Then like multiple things happening. And then you go outside and you're living in poverty. Then you go to, so it's where you're constantly living in a state of fight or flight because you never know what's going to happen next. So the PTSD becomes complex. And in complex PTSD, as an adult, you walk around with a lot of shame and guilt because of what you did to survive. And shame has to do more with who you are, with who you believe yourself to be. Guilt has to do with what I did as opposed to who I believe myself to be. But for someone who has multiple occurrences of trauma in their childhood, they create I've heard you use the word identity a lot. So someone with multiple occurrences of childhood trauma, they create an identity of who they are that many times feels very shameful, dirty, not good enough, depending on what it is that happened. So for example, for myself, by the time I was 16, I already lived in 17 houses. There was a time where I lived out of a garbage bag. Basically, all my belongings, my clothing were in a garbage bag. That was, out of everything I've been through, and that happened when I was around 14 years old. By the time I was 14, I had already had I was already witnessing a lot of domestic violence in my home, not necessarily the typical type that you would think of, like the father hitting the mother. It wasn't like that. It was more domestic violence as far as both of my parents were very, very angry, aggressive, that sort of thing. And then my brother ended up turning on me. So he was the one that was mostly a behavioral issue. And so he got a lot of the hitting. And then he ended up turning on me. So then from the time we came back home around 15 to the time I left to California, I had to deal with him beating me up. And that's one of the reasons why I had to leave Miami, was because I knew something terrible was going to happen. So I literally had to leave, because it got to the point where I was going to end up like one of those movies where I have to defend myself, and it's a life and death situation. So it was that. So I'm a survivor of all of that. And I just kept believing that I remember being 9 years old and believing that there's no way this could be real. There's no way that this could be right. So I must have been abducted by aliens, and now these are aliens. That's what my 9-year-old mind made up. My family they're aliens, or I'm an alien. I've been abducted, and this is the only thing that makes sense to me, because it never made sense to me that could be a normal family, a way of treating family. So my brain made that up because I would not accept that was real, which is my hard-headedness. My hard-headedness is life is amazing. Life has to be great. And so I literally thought that, and for a minute, I believed that. I actually believed that for a good bit. I believed that was my truth, because I was rejecting that this could actually be my family, and that this could really be the way we treat each other.
First of all, thank you for sharing that with us. I know that you lead many circles and many groups, and this is probably not the first time that you've shared this story, but I want to thank you for sharing that with me and with our audience today. And I know that reliving memories, whether you've shared it 100 times or for the first time, it's always brings up emotion. And so I want to thank you and appreciate you for sharing that story with us. I do want to acknowledge. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, for me, it's very important to tell your story, which is why I did Thrive Talk. And that's why I have people telling their story. And even right now, me telling you the alien story, I easily say it, but there is still a residual part of me that feels the shame of, how could you be so dumb to think you're an alien? So there is that part. We all have parts of us, especially there's parts of us that get created to survive. So I created a part of me that believed that to survive that situation, but there's still that residual part of me, because I can't, I don't have the Men in Black little thing to make my memories erase. So that part's still there. So I want to tell you that it's important. Because I find it so important to tell our story, and because I want people out there to feel less crazy, because when we're going through all this stuff and when we experience complex PTSD, many people literally feel like they're losing their mind. They feel you just can't make sense of the things that happen. And there's people that have even gone through worse than I have. And it's so hard to make sense of it that you secretly feel crazy, even though you act normal in the world. So I tell my story and I share my crazy thoughts so that people could feel less crazy. It's very important for me for everyone to understand that these are all just symptoms and byproducts of trauma. But we shouldn't, I have to show how we can live past the shame and share our stories, if that makes sense.
It certainly makes sense. There's a lot of things that I made notes of in this, and so we're probably going to dig a little bit deeper, but I'm interested from a clinical standpoint, analyzing this, if you can, from a third party point of view of when we're making up those stories in order to live in that reality. So as a 9-year-old girl, and you're imagining that you're an alien or was abducted, from a clinical standpoint, what's going on? Why are we doing that?
So that is, I think, look, like if I was able to detach and look at myself clinically as the 9-year-old thinking that, I think that was my way of coping, and it was almost a form of dissociation, because I had to dissociate from the reality of the bad treatment and it was like harsh and cruel treatment. So the only way that I could make sense of it was a little bit of dissociation, which later on turned into major avoidance in my life. You know what I mean? Major avoidance and fake it till you make it. So that's what I would say. It's I would think it's something like that. It's a coping mechanism. It's not necessarily. So I'm trained to know that that's not a bad thing, because I'm trauma informed and I'm a trauma therapist. So as a trauma therapist, I understand that. For example, if I have a client, I don't ask what's wrong with you. I ask what happened to you. Because usually when you hear a person's story, then everything they're doing makes sense. Because I understand that all the things that we think that is dysfunctional, dysfunctional thinking, dysfunctional feelings, or dysfunctional behaviors are really just ways to survive. So perhaps if I wouldn't have created that story in my mind, what would have happened to me? What if at 9 I would have had to accept or believe, because it wasn't really, I can't say accept, because my parents did love me. They just were very immature and were dealing with their own stuff. So what if I would have believed at that time, my parents don't love me? My father told me that I'm a pig and I deserve to die, because that's what I would hear. We deserve to die. Why are we alive? We should be dead. And I was hearing that at 7, 8, 9. So what if I would have believed that was true, and I would have done something to myself? So if you look at it from that standpoint, then you would realize that me thinking I'm an alien was something that was created from somewhere inside of me, to help me survive. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So a lot of things we do is really to help us. Even addictions are formed as a way to survive. A lot of behaviors. I could sit here and tell you so many different behaviors that come from a place of having our needs met and to help us survive.
And I'm also interested in then, so you have this coping mechanism to survive, but yet you still have this positive, optimistic mindset of like, life is amazing and there's got to be more. And this, like you just said, of I'm not going to believe this story that's being told to me. And as a very young child, you're not given all the tools to be able that we have today, that you and I have today is what I mean. Not today in terms of a timeline, but that you and I have today, the tools that we've been, through school, through courses, through coaching and everything. We don't have that as a 7-year-old, right? Or you didn't have that. So where did you find this optimism in this time?
To be really honest, I found it watching TV. I think I did a lot of dissociation in different ways. So major form of dissociation for me, or disconnect, because it wasn't fully dissociation, it was more like a disconnect, was watching TV shows like The Facts of Life. I mean, I'm 53, so I'm talking about old. I'm talking about like really old.
I know the Facts
TV
of
shows.
Life. I know the Facts of Life.
Like these shows. The one of the family with the squares going
Brady
around
Bunch.
like that, the Brady Bunch. So I would watch these shows, and then my mind, I would say like, okay, that's how it's supposed to be.
Okay.
Maybe they should have abducted me.
Well,
I would be like, that's what it's. So I created a vision based off these TV shows. Maybe that's why I don't believe social media is bad too, by the way. So
I was just thinking that. I was going to circle back to that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's it. That's what I was going to say. That I think it saved me. It saved me. If I didn't have those lifelines.
I think that's why it's like so important to put out positive messages on social media and put out, like your video, your talk show, the Thrive Talk Show. And, I'll give myself some credit here in terms of like what I'm doing every morning where I come on to try to inspire people. That's why it's so important to people like yourself and me and all the different people that we're surrounded with to put out positive messages, because you never know who's consuming it and you never know where they are in their life to consume it. And I love that you circled back to what you said about social media, not thinking all of it's bad, because it really is about like, what are you consuming? Like you were watching The Facts of Life, you were watching the Brady Bunch, which were wholesome, loving families and friends, and The Facts of Life, a melange of different people from different places, all coming together under that one woman's home. So
exactly.
You're absorbing this positive message from there. You could have been watching a negative show, but that's not what you watched. You watched a positive show. So there is I think some power in social media and in television that can be used for good.
And then the tipping point would be like, what are we more inclined to consume? Because I was consuming that, but my brother was not consuming that.
Right.
So my brother went in another direction, and I don't have the answer as to why one goes in one direction and the other goes in another direction. But I know he and I, we went in very different directions, and we were always in different directions. He's not even alive. He died.
Oh.
He died 2 years ago, and he's younger than I am. And for a long time, he was a source of pain for me because of what he was doing to me, but also because I always had survivor's guilt, because I always felt like I felt guilt because why was I surviving? Why was I not becoming what he was becoming? And why couldn't I save him? So maybe a lot of your listeners could identify with survivor's guilt, because there's, in a family of 5, everyone will go in different directions. And you're like, but why? The same thing happened to all of them, which is not true either. The same thing didn't happen to all of us. And we don't all have the same parents, because the way that I was treated by my father wasn't the way he was treated by my father. He was treated very badly. And even though I observed it, I wasn't treated that way, other than the verbal things that my dad was saying, but I was not hit by my father. He was. So everyone has different experiences. And I want to let a lot of people off the hook, because a lot of times the criticism comes of like, well, why are you like that? Your sister isn't like that. And it's like, well, she didn't experience what this one experienced. So it's so important to let people off the hook, so that to allow a little bit of compassion to enter the room. We need compassion for healing.
One, I want to say that again, like, we need compassion for healing. I love that. And I want to go into that too, of like, we all have a different story. And I just learned this recently. I took a coaching course. And in the coaching course, it was about, understanding obviously your client, because you're the coach. And it was what they were sharing with us is that, when you say, oh, I understand, I've been there, I've been there. We understand that in certain contexts that makes sense. But in the context that we're speaking is that every experience is different. And if I was, which I wasn't, if I was abused as a child and you were abused as a child, and I were to say to you, oh, I understand, I don't, because our abuse was completely different. And even if we grew up in the same home and experienced it, as you just said, even if you had another sibling who was also an observer, you both observed 2 different stories.
Yes, exactly.
Or 3 different.
So instead of saying I understand, a better thing to say is I get you. So because you're right, we don't understand. And even when you say you understand, I would say, what do you understand?
Right.
Like if I was, I'll say, what do you mean you understand? What part of what I'm saying do you actually understand? So it could be like, I get you. I get with what you're saying, that you said this and this and this. It's better to know that they were heard than for them to know that you understand, because your client will always protect you. Look, clients, like people like us who have experienced very horrible things, let's say, and those of us that end up being empathetic, we sense you. So that's what a lot of therapists have to understand this too, that I'm gonna notice how you feel about my story. So I'm going to protect you by not saying everything. If you start cringing or if you start looking sad for me, then I'm just not going to tell you the rest, because I don't want to give you that pain. So it's so important to take care, to watch that, so that then I don't feel responsible for taking care of your emotions. So anyway, that's why it's better to say, like, I get you based off this that you said, instead of I understand. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. And in fact, I'm gonna give us a little levity here in that was certainly your Miami accent coming out. Not accent, but just I get you. I get you. What they taught us in the coaching program was, I hear what you're saying. To acknowledge, I hear what you're saying.
I don't like I hear what you're saying, because it sounds... Okay, so the reason why I don't like I hear it is because it doesn't sound like you're a witness. So if you say I get you, then I'm witnessing, but you have to follow up I get you with why you get me also. Like,
Mm.
I get you because if you're saying that this and this happened, I get why you would feel the way you feel, because now I'm witnessing for you with through your story. I'm
Mm-hmm.
witnessing. I'm a witness for you, as opposed to I hear you.
Mm-hmm.
I rather you see with me. You see what I'm saying? I'd
Mm-hmm.
rather you be in the room with me and feel for me and feel you. So it's more like,
well,
I'm witnessing.
It's more than one part. Yeah, it's acknowledging it, and also
That's the difference between observing and witnessing.
Mm-hmm.
You see, witnessing is I'm with you.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, observing, you're just like on the outside across the street. Witnessing is I'm right here. I'm in it.
Right. I feel for you. I'm feeling it. I'm experiencing it with you, because you the way you told your story, I could experience what you experienced.
Yeah.
So different.
It is very different. I also want to go back to forgiveness, or go into forgiveness. In order to move on, to move on from what you experience, for what anybody's experiencing, forgiveness has to play a role. And I'm interested in how you either went about that or how you go about it today.
Right. So forgiveness, that's a big one. So forgiveness, it is really hard. That part was really hard. And like I said, I'm 53, and I think I entered the realm, not even just the realm of forgiveness, around 43.
An observer of forgiveness.
Yeah, I was like an observer. I was like, I don't really get this, but I'm just gonna watch it for a second. and that's, but I really was nowhere near it, because the childhood trauma never ended. So I separated myself from it, but it never ended with my brother, my mother, my brother, and my father. My brother went on to be a drug addict and cause more problems, and have it just evolved into a bigger monster. So I was outside watching it because I removed myself from that situation. So it was hard for me to find forgiveness when I'm still seeing the same things play out, and my brother continued to be abusive with me, except for in a different way, because I had removed myself. He really never stopped. There were just moments of peace followed by more craziness. So it was so hard for me to forgive. But I'll tell you where I found forgiveness. Even though when I say that, I was always still very much helping my family, because one of the products of all my trauma was that I became severely codependent. And I'm, you know what codependency is?
You could explain it.
So codependency is, I made myself responsible for their well-being. I would not take care of myself just to make sure they were okay. Those are just symptoms, like people pleasing, saying yes when you mean no. Like, these are all symptoms of codependency. So I became extremely, extremely codependent. I developed this humongous fear of being alone, and being left alone, and being abandoned, because I was always abandoned. So these are the struggles I had as an adult. But in my early 40s, I owned my community mental health center. I employed my dad. I employed my brother at one point. And so these are my codependent parts. But my dad, I ended up giving him the book, The Secret. I gave him The Secret, and he read that book, and he transformed. He gave me the biggest lesson that he gave me was his transformation. So that just confirms for me, people could change. It's just a matter of information and decision. So I gave him the Law of Attraction, the Secret. He read it. He wouldn't put it down. He would walk around with that book for like a whole year. He walked around with that book everywhere he went. He would text me all the time. Thank you so much for giving me this book. My life has completely changed. I love you. He completely changed. He completely changed. And then from there, he graduated to the Bible, and then he made further transformations. So my dad is a very different man right now. And he gave me that gift of showing me that a lot of people don't get that. A lot of people have abusive parents or chaotic parenting and that sort of thing, and they never see, they always yearn for that. So I did get that from my dad, not necessarily from my mom, because she kept on with her toxic relationship with my brother, but I did get it from him. So I was able to start forgiving from that point. I was able to start realizing, like, okay, there is another way. Because I'm not saying just because I was positive and always seeking the light doesn't mean that I didn't have phases of self-destruction. It doesn't mean that I wasn't human. I am also human, and I also had codependency, and I had rage, and I grew up with two people that had extreme rage. So I learned to display my emotions through anger, or I learned to be aggressive. And my brother was also like that. My brother, since the age of 14, he was in and out of jail. And then every time he'd go in jail and come out, he'd come back a little angrier and a little stronger. And I'd get I would be his target. So that's what happened with him. And so we grew up it was very, very aggressive. He was in gangs. It was hard for me to forgive my brother. But right before he died, we actually had a really good, I would say 6 months. And we were, for some odd reason, we were able to talk about childhood experiences. Actually, the Thursday before he died, we were able to talk about the time period that we were homeless. And so I just thank God for that conversation too, because I always wanted, what I always wanted was to have that connection with him and to save him. But he was just always so angry because he would always tell me, we'll see. It was always a competition with me. Like, we'll see who dies with the most toys. And it was mostly because I was always ducking and not trying to get in trouble, while he was so aggressive that he was always in trouble. So he would almost attract all this negativity to him, but then he punished me for it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, it sounds like there was, for lack of a better way of explaining it, some jealousy of watching you thrive and seeing where he is. And so there's this comparison of, we'll see who dies with most toys, that's the only thing he has to hang on to.
Always like that.
I do want to pay some respect to him. What was his name?
Roberto Cotto. Yes. And I want your listeners to know too, because as I speak and tell my story, I like to educate, and that's how I let people off the hook. That's what I call letting people off the hook. I want people to know that when you're living in a home with severe dysfunction or chaotic parents or immature parents, this sort of thing, it creates a lot of sibling rivalry. And that is one of the byproducts of these type of homes. And then it's not so much that the siblings hate each other or are unlike each other. It's that the environment caused this. The environment caused the sibling rivalry. And it's very difficult.
I'm so happy you shared that too and shined a light on that, in that so often I feel there's a couple of things that you said that I want to just make sure we touch on here, is that so often we see these kids and they're competing with each other or whatever. And like you just said, a lot of that comes out of what's happening in the home. Some of it's good, right? So some of it is like, you got a wholesome, wonderful home, but you're really big on athletics. And you're really, you're only highlighting what the accomplishments of one kid. So of course there's going to be the sibling rivalry because they're going to compete, or one kid's going to shut down. So we see that so often. And then the other thing that you said that I also want us to acknowledge, especially for children, since we're talking about childhood trauma here, is you said, and I highlight this word, learned to be angry and learned to display my emotions that way. And that was a trigger, not trigger, but like I wanted to hang on that when you said it earlier, because I was like, you chose the word learned. In other things that you've talked about in healing and in forgiveness and all this other stuff, the word learned wasn't really there. It's like it's innate in us to be grateful and to be forgiving and to be loving and caring and to have coping mechanisms that make us think we're abducted by aliens, which I love, by the way. But we learn to be angry and we learn to display that. And I would love for you to maybe share a little bit more about using that word and why you chose that word.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for pointing that out, because it's important to understand where that comes from. So I learned to be violent, aggressive, and angry because that's how I learned to protect myself. So I had to fight my brother, who was a dangerous person. At 14, he didn't even go to juvenile hall. He went to an actual prison for kids for, at that point, cracking someone's head. So this is the guy I lived with. This was him at 14. And then imagine this 14-year-old going in and out of jail and kid prison, and him coming back home every 6 months. Then maybe he'll be taken back in for something else he did and coming back, and him getting a little bit bigger and a little bit more angry. And then here I am getting his beatings. He cracked my ribs. He threw me against the wall. Like, he did so many things to me, and they were all, he would intimidate me, intimidate my mom. So the only way that so how do we learn? We get conditioned. So maybe one day I stood up to him and he didn't hit me that day, and he laughed instead. He mocked me. But I would take mocking over getting slapped in the face. So in that moment, I learned, okay, I need to get angry with him. Then maybe the next time he came at me, and maybe I picked up a scissors, anything around me, and that made him run, which was actually the last thing that happened. The last thing that happened was that he threw me against the wall. I got knocked out for a couple seconds. When I got back up, I ran and grabbed 2 knives. And he saw me, and he ran into the street, and he ran out. But before I did that, I called the police, and I called the police on myself, and I said, come get me because I'm going to kill my brother. And I ran out, and I saw him up the street laughing while I was crying hysterically. I came back in the house, and I knew the police was coming, and I thought, now I'm going to be in so much trouble for all this. But at that point, I didn't know what else to do because no one was protecting me. I had no protection in my house from no one. So at that point, I had just had enough. I couldn't do anything else. And as I was walking back, who did I find? My mom crying at the front of the house saying, please don't do anything to him. Please don't tell the police. Please, please, please. He's going to go back to jail. So instead of her thinking about poor me, she was thinking poor him. So that right there was another slap in my face, which I had already been used to that so much. And when the police came, what happened was that they realized, I think somehow they must have realized what happened, because I was laying down with a bag of ice in my head, because he had literally bent me over and slammed me against the wall, against the corner. And so I ended up getting hit right here. And so at that point, I thought, that's the life and death point that I was telling you about, where I thought, if I don't get out of here, something horrible is going to happen. So I ended up leaving. I left to California and Kansas. But my learning escalated every time, because I didn't know what else to do. I had nothing else. I had no other tools to defend myself. And even his friends would never step in to protect me either, because they were scared of him. Everyone was scared of him.
Right.
Everyone was scared of him. His friends, if they saw me, his friends would say, please go home. Please don't let anyone come say hi to you, because your brother's going to kick my butt. And they wouldn't say like that, but that's what they would say. Like, don't let anyone come to. They were everyone in the community, everyone, and I lived with him. Right. So it was just really turning. So I finally told my mom, I'm leaving. I can't live here anymore with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so important to. Again, I want to thank you for sharing your story there. In that, what I'm saying in terms of the importance here is to understand about that learned behavior, because when we go back to childhood trauma, we have teachers and police and different people in our community interacting with children that were like you and that were like your brother. And I think it's so important to understand this, because then you can either help them or provide some sort of resource or tools or guidance for them, or some sort of empathy for them. And where this kind of comes from, where I'm coming from at least, and I can't share too much because it's not my story, but my wife works with, she's a special ed teacher in the inner city. And she works with children, 6th graders, who live lives that you're talking about. We've brought things for them. And they live in shelter. Some of them, not all of them. Some of them live in shelters. Some of them have experienced a very similar life to yours. And like you said, and some of them much worse. And I've heard some terrible stories. But why this is so coming up right now for me is we just had this conversation, my wife and I, about a child in her class that's abusive verbally. with her and with other students around her. And she comes home and she is just not herself. And she's speaking in a way that's not herself. And, it's concerning for me, for her own safety, because she did say that at one point the TA in the classroom was worried about her safety because the kid came charging at her but stopped. But the conversation that we ended up having was understanding. We spoke about, where is this kid coming from, and what life is he living? And where I'm going with this story is, while we were acknowledging all of that, it was acknowledging it, but also not allowing it to change who we are. And I
Right.
think that that's really important, and why I'm speaking to community leaders and teachers and doctors and police and everybody around, is that because this child is acting this way, don't change who you are, and don't bring yourself to their level of being violent with them or physical with them or speaking to them in a way, because it's so important that we hold a safe space for them, because they don't have that safe space. And that's the conversation that my wife and I had, of like making sure that it's important to her to hold a safe space in her classroom for not just that child, but for all the kids. And
Yeah.
There's going to be kids like your brother who we're not going to be able to help.
Right.
But it's important that we don't go down that road. But then what about the kids like you that we can help? And so when we open our minds to understanding, then there's like people like you that flourish and that create groups of communities of people who are coming together and becoming stronger. And we didn't even get into your programs or your events that you do. And just look at you, right? Like, this is what can come out of an abusive household, is someone like you, right?
And I think that me being the example of me is more of what actually happens than the example of my brother. And I don't have statistics to show this, but I would love to know, because the truth is, I don't know if you know what the ACEs are. It's a research study called Adverse Childhood Experiences Study that shows that only 3 to 4 people out of 10 say that they did not experience at least one childhood that they didn't experience one adverse childhood experience. So that leaves about around 6 people saying that they experienced at least one, but usually they experience 1, 2, or 3. So more people are experiencing, it's almost like at a pandemic level. So trauma, especially childhood trauma, is at a pandemic level. And I don't know if it's just my focus, but I believe that more people come out of it somewhat more focused the way that you and I are focused, as opposed to being the ones out there causing harm. And a lot of times there are people who cause harm, but they don't do it consciously. They just maybe don't know another way, or they don't have education on how to properly communicate. Maybe they don't have emotional intelligence, maybe, a bunch of other things. But I don't believe that the majority of people are out there doing evil things, coming from a place of like the type of home that I grew up in. I think when given the opportunity through education, I think information could cause a transformation. So through education, which I call it psychoeducation. Through psychoeducation, I think people have an opportunity to do good. And I don't know if I'm just too optimistic, but that's what I really believe. I think you believe that too, because you're doing the same thing. I think you're
100%. But, I don't think it's too good to be true, because, you just said that about your dad. A man
Right.
who you said was abusive and would say terrible things. And all of a sudden, when you gave him the information, when you gave him the path to get better, he got better. And who knows his story, right? Like, what's his story if he's like that? Because
yeah, and I know his story. So now I know his story. So I'm like, ooh, one day he started telling me some of his story, and I just looked at him and I said, thank you for telling me that. Now I know why a monster raised me. And he just opened his eyes and looked at me, and I'm like, and I said, do you understand? That's trauma.
right.
And this is what happens with trauma. So his abuse came from a place of rage and anger. And it wasn't like he he intended to be verbally abusive, physically abusive, and that sort of thing. It was just, he was in such a rage.
Right.
And there was so much immaturity and so much survival, like living just based off survival, that we were hurt by that. But I want to go back to something you said about your wife, what you were explaining, and how you were saying just because they're like that doesn't mean that we need to show up differently. And what you're describing there is the choice of living out of fear or living out of love. So that is, if I intentionally choose to approach every situation with love, I'm going to do good. If I show up out of fear, then I'm going to get angry. I'm going to take things personal. I'm going to react to you. And this is just something that I've learned along the way to change my behaviors, to change my approach to things. And I've changed a lot. I'm not, who you see right now is not the person who was here 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Ditto.
But it's just really believing that we could grow, that we could learn, and that we could improve and get better. And that, this is why I created the program Thrive Life. That's what the whole goal is, to reach the Thrive Life, where we thrive in all these different places and all these different areas. And that distinction of being intentional to show up with love instead of fear, because I struggled with fear for so long. And fear made me do terrible things to people, to myself. Fear made me, fear went from being my protector to basically being my destructor later on as an adult. Because fear protected me. Fear told me, go in the room and hide. Fear did all those things for me. And then later it wasn't doing things for me. Right.
And I want to just say something too, because I want to hear more about your program. I just heard this quote this morning, and it's not the first time I've heard it, but I heard it this morning. It's Buddha's quote, which is, anger is a gift. It's a gift that you can choose to accept and receive, but so is love. Love is also a gift, and you can choose to accept and receive it as well. And at the end of it, the choice is yours. And I was listening to call it a podcast for now, just make it easier. A session, it really was. And he went on to talk about, I believe it was Viktor Frankl, who was the Holocaust victim, and talking about our mind, and that our mind is the last place of freedom, is that nobody can take that freedom away from you, and that you can make choices in your mind. Is anything, the circumstances around you might not be able to control, but what's happening in your mind you can control. And if you want to control it and be in a flying saucer, then I say go for it, because if that's what you need to get to right where you are today, to be the beautiful, powerful, strong woman that you are today, then shoot, put 3 eyes on me and call me an alien, right? I'll take it any day. But
and Viktor Frankl is a great example of a person who decided he took his power back. He's the greatest example, one of the greatest examples of taking your power back through the meaning that you give to things. Like, he completely would be in the middle of horror, and what kept him alive was the idea of what he was going to do when he got out, just the vision that he had and the meaning that he was giving to everything. And that's literally, like, if anyone could take just that little piece, we could choose at any moment the meaning that we're going to give to our experiences. And from there, that's just the path.
So I was on your Facebook page stalking you, which, by the way, I
stalked you too.
I love that. Yeah, I noticed. I was like, oh, I got a new follower. I just want to circle back on how positive social media can be, in that your Facebook page is literally like just all positive messages, quotes, stories. Like, you write stories. Like, I have your whole story here about what you just talked about, fear and overcoming fear, and it's on your Facebook page. Like, you write it all out. It's beautiful, and you have these great videos and everything. And the one that I just watched was when you were inviting people to come to your course, to your program, which you put out on January 31st of the Thrive program. So I would love for you to share with our audience what the program is all about, and if you're going to be doing another one that they can jump in on.
So the program is ongoing. People could jump in whenever.
Okay.
I'm going to say, it's funny because I feel like it's the most It's the most impactful way to work with me. It's also the least expensive way to work with me. So I don't know how it worked out that way, but I enjoy it so much. So basically I created a program based off everything that I have learned that has saved my life and that has helped others. So it really is like a marriage between trauma therapy and personal development, because I always say, like, getting a master's degree in psychology and learning psychology saved my life, but personal development transformed my life. It's what got me to start my business. It's what got me to go through all these everything I've been through as far as transformation, because we could change, but transformation is so much harder. Transformation is being intentional, shedding. The shedding process is so hard, because shedding means shedding relationships, shedding habits, shedding habits that we have, shedding our belief system, just shedding and shedding. I've been doing shedding for so long. This is why I'm like I think of the little girl that I was growing up. Then I think of the 15-year-old, and in my 20s, my whole 20s, I was faking it till I made it. I was married. I was going to school in California and Kansas, then back here in Miami. I was having my kids. I looked perfect. I made sure I looked perfect. My mom was a model, so she made sure that I knew that I always needed to look perfect and all of that. But I was having panic attacks all the time. I was living in a state of dread. So what I was displaying wasn't true. So I had to shed all of that, because in order for us to become who we need to become to create this life that I call the Thrive Life, we have to literally become someone new. So when I think of that, the other versions of me, it's almost like those are just really good friends of mine that I know very well. But I don't experience anymore who they were. I can't experience it. I could remember it, like if it was a story or like if it was a friend of mine. And maybe that's part of my whole dissociation that I was telling you. I'm not sure, but I'm so detached from it. I'm so like, I'm in this moment, and I'm really a lot about living in the moment. But my whole program has to do with that. It has to do with it's almost like a trauma-informed personal development program. And it helps people. It's really about changing the way you think, feel, and act so that you could become a new personality. So you could have a different way of showing up in the world. And that way you could be very intentional in creating the life that you want. So I'm extremely intentional. in everything I do, in really everything. And it's just little by little having more and more self-mastery and being more conscious, like living it out of a more conscious state.
So much of what you say resonates with me too, because I say that all the time. I actually call it old Michael. I always say to people, I'm like, old Michael would have, and you're so right. Like I know this today, and I think about it today, and you're right. You know, the imposter syndrome creeps in every once in a while. The self-doubt creeps in every once in a while. But then we realized, I love that you used the word intentional, is that I'm intentionally seeking a better life for Michael. I'm intentionally seeking a better life for the people that want to come with me. And it's just a different life, and it's making choices that help me. And I think what's important to get out of that is that it's not being somebody that you're not, and you use the word fake it till you make it. And that's what leads to panic attacks, right? Because you're fake. But this is becoming who you are and who you're actually meant to be and who you have potential to become. Yeah. So all self-development does, and what you're talking about and shedding and being intentional does, is just help you get closer to who that person is living inside of you. And so I love that. Yeah. I would love to hear a little bit more about some of your techniques, strategies, ideas, whatever you want to call them, on shedding, because I know so many people out there are like, okay, great. Like, I know I need to, stop talking to this one negative person, or I know I need to, or I want to stop drinking alcohol, or I know I want to or need to lose some weight, whatever it is, right? I'm interested in what's something that worked for you in terms of shedding.
So when you say that, you're referring to change versus transformation. So I'll give you an example. If I have someone with codependency, let's say, and they're in a very toxic relationship, maybe domestic violence, whatever else, right? I am never going to be the therapist that says the goal is for you to break up with this person. That's not going to work because you're going to do the change by breaking up with that person. But then guess who you're going to pick up? You're going to pick up that same person with a whole other name and a whole other body, So that's not really a change. So what I go for here is transformation. And the only way that I believe we could really transform is by changing our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. So the way we think every day, the way that we feel every day, and the things we do every day. For example, in any moment in time, we're showing up with a particular attitude. Our attitude is like if right now I came to your podcast, right? And if I would have been thinking, oh, I'm so nervous. I feel so scared. What is he going to ask me? I'm not, who am I to be on this podcast? And I start doing that. I'm going to show up here all sunken in. And my attitude is going to be one of a lack of self-confidence. I'm going to feel less than and all of that. But if I show up with a different attitude where I'm saying, I deserve to be here. I've done a lot of work. I'm so excited to be here, which all morning I was saying, I'm so excited for the podcast. I can't wait to do it. I researched you. That was part of my excitement. And then I show up here with the idea of adding value to your, I was going to say to your clients, to your audience, that my attitude is completely different. But that's just an attitude, and that's just one moment in time. What I go for is, what is your attitude in the string of all the different points of your life? The person that we are, the attitude that we show up with every single day, whatever that looks like every single day, if we do it for long enough time, it becomes our personality. And our personality is the part that we need to transform in order for us to become a different person. So that's why, like how we were talking about, like, the person you were is so different from who you are now. You must have gone through a transformation too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people are angry at 20, angry at 30, and just rageful at 40, and they're just the same worst person. So for us to get better and transform and go towards our potential, our possibilities, that greatness that you're talking about, we literally need to be so intentional in transforming ourselves in those three areas. And like, I'm not even a bad believer of fake it till you make it, because all you have to do is change one of those three areas at any point in time. And if you do that long enough, you won't sustain that same attitude. So if I had to fake, for example, in all my 20s, because I also am a high school kickout. I was like, I never finished school. My attitude in school was just so aggressive and so bad. They would send me to opportunity school. Like all of that, all this stuff happened. So when I went into like college, I was still thinking who I was. I was still feeling what I was feeling, the panic, the fear, but I pretended to be a student. And I acted like everyone. I would look how other people act and I would act like them. And so doing that allowed me to transform the other parts, except for that transformation happens with time. I wasn't going to transform the last 20 years in a week just because I decided to show up different. I had to actually practice that over and over. And it really wasn't until I entered my 30s that it all sort of started coming along, like the other parts, the thinking and the feeling. So for us to transform, we have to transform. The transformation happens in that triad. I call it the ultimate destiny triad. So why do I call it the ultimate destiny triad? Is because those three things together, if we are intentional in those three parts, we will be the intentional creators of our life, and we will create our ultimate destiny. And it will be us creating it, us being the writers of our story, and we're the main character, as opposed to being the victims of our life and just letting things happen to us. So I choose to not be a victim. I am not a feather. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, I am not a feather getting blown by the wind. Like, if the wind blows hard, I'm going to fly fast. And if the wind doesn't blow, I'll just stay there today. No, I am not a feather. I am the intentional creator of my life. And so I am intentional in what I'm thinking today, what I'm feeling today, and how I'm showing up, which is what I'm doing. And that's what I teach people in my program. Like, it takes a while, because look, guys, like, I'm saying guys now, I'm talking to everyone now. I'm like, look, guys, let me tell you, I'm telling you, I've been a therapist for 25 years, and it's really only been And I'm not saying I changed in the last 3 years. That's not true. I've changed all along, little changes, little changes, little changes. But the results of those changes have stacked up to where I've only seen the transformation. The transformation flourished in the last 3 years. So it just takes a lot, depending on how deep you are in the pain, in the wound of who you were, and in the victim, and all of that. So it's different for everyone. People, and that's the part where compassion comes in, where people are like, they feel less than because, I did your program and I wasn't able to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, you're so ahead of me. It took me 20 something years to see what you're seeing right now. You know what I mean?
Right.
It wasn't overnight. But these are the 3 areas that I call them like the realms of experience. We experience life in our mind with our thoughts. We experience life with our emotions. And we experience life with what we do and the way we interact with life. So if we're able to change any one of those 3 parts, everything changes.
And I liked how you said that too about the 3 parts of experience, because like when we go back to the stories and how, you have an observer, you have 3 different observers of something happening. They could be experiencing it 3 different ways, through their mind, through their body, through like what you just talked about there.
Yeah. And that's when you're out of alignment. That's when you're out of alignment, when you're like, your brain is going, I believe in myself and I want to go for this. But then your body is going in another direction because it's feeling fear. So when we're feeling the fear, but we're like, but I want to do it, but I can't because I'm so scared, then you're out of alignment. The goal is to get all of that in alignment so that you can move forward. I mean, it's happened to us. I mean, it's so much, so many times you think you want to do something, you get close to the edge of it, and then you're like, oh no, not today. I think I'll do it tomorrow.
Oh my goodness.
Fear takes over. But if you have those 3 things in alignment, if you have your thoughts aligned with what you're feeling, then you could do anything.
You just reminded me of a story for me, which I hope helps everybody see this and understand what I'm saying here. What you just said on the edge, you just brought up a memory for me of a childhood memory, not traumatic, a good one, but had to do with fear. I've been a skier my whole life, and I've always been a really, really good skier. And I mean, this is the one thing I can pound my chest on of like, I was an incredible skier at a very young age, doing black diamonds and everything on Whiteface, which is an Olympic mountain.
Wow.
So I think I was like 8, I must have been like 9 or 10 because my brother was born. And there was a double diamond, and it's called the Rumor, and it's at Gore Mountain. And the Rumor's a double diamond because the face of it is actually just like straight down. It's like a 5 or 6 foot drop. And the only 2 ways down that face is, one, to just take the face and just go straight down, and then you just are able to navigate the rest of the mountain because it's not as steep after that. Or you can kind of like sidestep down on the edges on the side of the mountain. And I remember I skied up to it. I had my ski tips right over the edge, and fear sunk in my body. And I mean, I'm a kid, so like I'm fearless at that age. Like I'm not worried about breaking bones. I'm just fearless, right? But fear sunk into my body, and I was like, nope, I'm not doing this today. And I remember we left the mountain, and I was just like, we were in the car and we were talking about it. And it was a positive message that came out of it. My father was talking about like, he was just talking about how like a real man at the time, his, dad talking to his boy. He's like, a real man knows when to walk away from something. And I'm proud of you. You walked away from it, right? He was probably just protecting me, quite honestly. Later on, a couple years later, I was there with my girlfriend, and I get to the Rumor, and at Gore, if you go to the Rumor, on your way there is actually an intermediate. And then that intermediate loops down and meets at the bottom of this double diamond, the Rumor. So I was like, all right, you go take the intermediate. I'm going to do Rumor, and you meet me at the bottom, and you'll see me, right? Fear hit me again. Ski tips are over. Fear hits me. But now my girlfriend's down there watching me. And I'm like, oh crap, I got to do this. Talk about the man, right? The macho. I'm like, oh crap, I got to do this. So I do it. But here's what fear did to me. I go to do it, and now I'm a really good skier. I could definitely do this. I trip myself up on my skis, and I tumble down the entire mountain. Like because it's a double diamond and so steep, you can't stop your tumble. Like you just keep going. So I lost my ski at the top. I literally make it almost down to the bottom, like to where I'm shouting to her, I'm good, and she can hear me, right? So I climb back to the top, I buckle my ski in, I come down, and I get down to her and I go, I'm doing it again. We go back up to the top. She's begging me not to. And I'm like, I have to do it. And
because now you felt the pain of not showing up good for her. So that pain became more than the fear of going down.
And so I went up and I did it. And then after that, I did it over and over and over again. And I didn't fall because I just conquered that fear. I bring this up because of what we're just talking about now of like, I did kind of like lose a little track as to why I brought this up. But what I learned from all of this was fear can stop us from doing things, and fear can injure us sometimes. But when we learn to overcome that fear, we can actually be really successful at almost anything. And what I'm saying in all of this too is that I had the capabilities as that 10-year-old to do that mountain. I know I did, because I know what I did. All I did was put my ski tips down and go straight. That's all I had to do. But fear stopped me from doing it. And so when we're fearful, it doesn't mean that we don't have the capabilities to do something. You know, we can do it. We can do anything, really.
Exactly. And so what I learned to do, so the path to overcoming fear for me was to not try to overcome it, which led to overcoming it, which is instead of overcoming it, I just decided, I would say, I'm going to take fear to be a ride along with me. There goes my Miami also. And I'm like, you're going to be my ride along. And I literally thought this, like, it's my ride along, and I'm going to show fear courage. I'm going to introduce fear to courage. So, without without fear, there wouldn't even be courage. You need to have fear in order for courage to show up. So I would just take fear with me, because overcoming fear was an impossibility for me. It was just my home emotional base. That was my base. That was my home. So I couldn't get rid of it. So I just started deciding to be courageous. And through the courage, at this point, I'm right now, and it's little by little, guys. It's like every year, just continuing on. It's the progress of doing it. At this point, I really feel, I might be wrong, I'm not sure, but I feel like I live very fearlessly now. I have an idea and I jump at it. I just do it. I'm woken up by an inspiration, and I get up and I write it down, and then I act on it immediately. I don't think, how is it going to work? Is it going to work? What am I going to lose? Should I do it now? I don't think those things. I'm just like, we're doing it now. Let's do it. And we go. This is how I started doing events. Who am I to do events? I had never done events other than my kids' birthday parties. I never did an event. And here this. I am. All of a sudden, I became an event. I started doing events, and I had Billy Osbrooks, which is a motivational speaker. He's a top motivational speaker, and I just called him. And I became friends with him. And then I had him at my events, and I spoke at 3 of his events. So, so that, and all of those experiences teach me confidence. It teaches me what I'm saying right now, which is you got to do it anyway. You got to just bring fear with you and do courage, and then show fear, because fear was just a part of me. And it was my best friend, to be honest with you. Fear, I loved fear because it protected me. So it wasn't like I didn't have an antagonistic relationship with fear. It was like, thank you, fear. You saved me for this one. So then I started actually then teaching fear that it's okay. Does that, that's basically I know I talk in these weird ways. I love this, because that's exactly, I got 2 things for you. One, that's exactly probably where I was trying to go with that story, was that it took courage to do it. But 2, right. I got a fun game for everyone here. And these don't air as quickly as my Instagram lives do. So if you're listening to this right now, this is definitely a few months later, and this has already taken place. But you can jump on my Instagram at Michael Esposito Inc. to watch this. But watch this, everyone. All right, I got something for you. You ready? So I do my Instagram lives every morning, and this morning, this is exactly what happened to me. I promise you, I was meditating. I meditate every day.
And in popped my mind, my Instagram lives. And I was like, all right, how do I continue these? What do I keep doing? And on March 2nd will be an entire month of me doing them every single day, Saturdays and Sundays included,
Wow.
right? And I have a goal to just continue them. That's my goal. But I'm like, I constantly need change. So I think that that's why I was meditating on it. It's like, how am I going to change it to where I can continue wanting to do it? And I was thinking, well, what if I collaborate with people? What if I have guests come on and it's not just me talking about these different things, but I have somebody come on, or maybe one of my viewers who are there live with me, I bring them on. But I was like, well, I know that sometimes some people want to watch, want to observe, but they don't want to be on it with me, right? So here we go. You ready to just jump in with me? I'd like to invite you as my very first invitation to join me on.
I'm like, where's this going? I'm like, I'm so confused. What are we doing?
We're gonna look fear in the eye, right? You said
right now?
Yes, that's right.
This minute?
Right now, this minute.
Okay.
This minute. Because, and not that you're fearful of doing this, but like inspiration, right? When you just said, when inspiration pops in my mind, I go for it.
Yeah.
I do it. When
Yes.
opportunity comes, I take it, right? Well, you didn't say exactly like that, but that's what you said. That's what I interpret. That's what I observed or witnessed. I get you.
Because inspiration comes from your soul. Fear comes from our subconscious mind, which is our past experiences. That's not real. That's the illusion. But our soul guides us. It gives you those inspirations. And that if we live more out of there and we attach ourselves more to that, then you will live more fruitfully for sure, because you're not letting fear control you. That's what I do. That's what I tell myself, and this is what I do. And I'll jump on Instagram Live. I'm not scared.
Yes,
I'm not scared.
I didn't think you were scared. I think what I wanted to show as an example to everybody is that you and I didn't talk about this prior. I let everybody. Right. I'm an open book. I let everybody know if we talked about something prior or not. We did not. This just came to me this morning of like, I want to invite a guest onto my Instagram Lives. And you just talked about like just jumping into things. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to invite her and I know she's going to say yes. So let's get my first booking right here.
Exactly. That'll be fun. That's so much fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you're going to see a twist to those Instagram Lives and you're going to be on there and share some knowledge. We'll talk some more later about it, but I just thought we can just give a quick example of like, look, inspiration and opportunity just struck. Let's jump on it. Right.
Exactly.
I want to, because, just so that everybody can get back to their daily lives. I know we're having a ton of fun right here. I love it when I meet with somebody like you where, in our pre-interview, like we hit it off like right away. I was like, all right, this is going to be a fun interview. Like we just have this like great chemistry between us. And then you just have so much knowledge and so much experience to share. I love it when we just go on and on and on. But unfortunately, all good things must wrap up, and we could always have you in studio in person to do this again. Oh
yeah. So give me a reason to go to New York.
So many. But before we wrap up, I do want to bring up Circle of Champions Worldwide, and just if you could just share its goal and what you're doing there.
All right. So when I said that it's been the last 3 years where I did the biggest leap, it was through the birth of Circle of Champions Worldwide. So that was just a vision that I had that I was too afraid to. That was during my fearful state where it was just there in my mind for like a few years. Thrive Life was another word that was given to me like years before too, and I didn't know what I was going to use that for. So I gave birth to Circle of Champions Worldwide. I just opened up a Facebook community, and everything changed from that point on. I did because before that, I've had Trinity Community Mental Center for 17 years now. It's been 17 years. So I would literally live in here. I say live because in my business, I'd be here like from the morning till 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. My kids would come here to be with me. So so this is the lifestyle I had for so many years. So with Circle of Champions Worldwide, I wanted community. I wanted to have a bigger impact on the world. That's why it's worldwide. I wanted to do this whole thing of finding people who have overcome any type of trauma, and that they're examples of goodness. They're examples of post-traumatic growth, of thriving, of things like that. So that's why I opened that up. And from there, I've met so many people. And now it's just a Facebook community where I do events. the Unleash Your Greatness events. I do in-person one and I do a virtual one. I try to do one a year. And we have speakers. I invite people who want to share their story of overcoming and thriving. And I believe like through your story, you give someone else a roadmap for their transformation and for them to be able to thrive. Everyone has, maybe someone won't connect with my story, but they'll connect with your story. Maybe they won't connect with my roadmap, but they'll connect with yours. So I try to have at least 5 or 6 different speakers, and I try to do it like TED Talk, but I call it like Thrive Talk, where I do the 20-minute thing, and then I do where you tell your story in that way. But that's what Circle of Champions is all about. It's a community, and we try to have meetups and events, and it's all about thriving. It's all about thriving and overcoming.
I love that. Absolutely love that. So I always like to ask about your mantra, but you've already shared it in that, and I don't think it's your mantra, but because you have so many different quotes on your Facebook and different ideas that you live by, but you said it, which was you don't need to know how when you allow your soul to lead, and I love that. So unless there's a different one that you would like to speak on, could you help us bring this full circle together?
Well, a big one that I always say is the person you became to survive is not the person you need to become to thrive. So that speaks to the transformation that we all have to go through to create the life that we want to live, the life that we see in our vision, but we're afraid to go for, or we have a disbelief. And I think that the visions that you get are not the visions that I get. So everyone thinks like, well, that's just something that popped in my mind. It's like, no, when you get a vision and you have that thing nudging at you, that is what you're meant to do. That's your soul's purpose. And I'm not religious, but I do believe in God, and I do believe in that we have a soul and that we have a purpose in life. And a lot of times I think it's wrapped around our pain. So everything I do is wrapped around the pain I experienced. Like here at Trinity, all I ever wanted was to work with foster kids because I felt like a foster kid, even though I never was a foster kid, but I know what it's like to move from house to house. And it fell into our laps. We ended up getting a contract for like 7 years working with foster kids and Dade County, the parents trying to get them back in the kids. And so if you just believe it and you move forward on it, the rest of the house will show up for you. A lot of what stops us is that we don't know the whole road, but we don't need to know the whole road. We only need to know the next step. And then when you take that step, like in Kansas, I used to drive at night and it would be really foggy and there's hardly any lights. So I never knew, like, I had to trust that as I drove, I wasn't going to fall off the edge of the earth. Right. I needed to trust that the road was going to continue. And that's sort of like how we go through life. We have to trust that whatever gets illuminated in front of us is enough for us to drive, to go that much further. And as we proceed, more will be given to us so that we could continue on that path. But we have to believe that. That's what I urge everyone to believe that. And we become who we need to become in the process, but we could also be intentional in that, in being able to be the type of person that could get the life that we want.
I am so grateful for the opportunity to meet with you today. Your stories, your authenticity, your sharing of everything, of knowledge of everything has just been an incredible journey today. I've really I'd like to say I enjoyed it, but I also I get you, and I want you to know that I'm also I want anybody who's listening as well that maybe has experienced childhood trauma and everything is there's a community there, and you've created it, and I'm so grateful for you to create a community of safety for people that experienced the type of trauma that you did and that others experience as well. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity to meet with you today. You've been just an amazing guest, and so your stories are so inspiring, and I'm so grateful for that. I want to make sure that people know how to connect with you. Of course, all of this will be in the show notes, but I want to make sure that people know how to connect with you, any programs or events that you have going on, if you'd like to share that with everyone now.
Well, before I do that, I want to say that I'm so grateful to be on your show too. I could tell, and that's why we hit it off, because I could tell you're such a light in the world as well with everything that you're doing. And this has been like a real honor for me. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm mostly on Instagram and Facebook, Sarai Nammur, or saraynammur.com. That's my website. And through there, you could message me and we will connect. I answer all my messages, and that's maybe not super quick, but I do answer my messages.
Cool. And how can somebody find your Facebook group?
It's Circle of Champions Worldwide.
Okay.
With the world is the icon. So yeah, and I also have a community number. I could give that number too, and I do daily inspirations through my community. And I just forgot the number right now, but I will.
That's
tell
the
you.
text message number that you have all over your Facebook page, right? All of your Instagram and Facebook. Like I've seen you post it.
Yeah, the 305-783-3343. That's my community number. So that's a texting community also that I have, where I communicate through. I just send daily inspirations, and I send news. I send news through there.
I love that.
And I am planning to do a live event here in Miami, which will probably be in August. And we just haven't settled on the date, but that would be in August.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll let our audience know. I want to thank you again so much for coming on the show. And listen, we're in New York, you're in Miami. It's nice up here. So you are always welcome back on the show, and it would be amazing to have you in studio next time.
Thank you. That'll be so much fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming on. Thank you for listening to The Michael Esposito Show. For show notes, video clips, and more episodes, go to michaelespositoinc.com/podcast. Thank you again to our sponsor, Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. That's DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den 10, you're giving back on a global scale. This episode was produced by Uncle Mike at the iHeart Studios in Poughkeepsie. Special thanks to Lara Rodrian for the opportunity and my team at Michael Esposito Inc.